P.F. Chang's has got you covered. Upscale ambiance, top-notch service, and an Asian-inspired meal leaving everyone happy. You know where to find them. In Town Center off of Corporate Boulevard, look for the John.
Now, the Hunt Palmer Show.
Yes! I feel like I've been waiting for this my entire life.
You're listening to the Hunt Palmer Show on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge.
Jolly good fun. Jolly good.
Locking down the middle of the day.
America's favorite daytime fun show.
Live from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio. This is Hunt Palmer.
Welcome in. Hunt Palmer coming to you from Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio downtown in the capital city on this Thursday, working towards the weekend. Appreciate you hanging out with us here on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge. Got Jordan Kitchens and Cassie Spazzali back there on the ones and twos, and lots to do here on this Thursday. It's March Madness really beginning in earnest. I think these are two and potentially four of the best days on the sports calendar as there are games underway, and they'll be going on until after midnight this evening, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Of course, LSU and Texas are going to go at it on the baseball field over the weekend. Joe Healy's going to join us to talk a little bit about that at 1:30, along with the rest of the SEC slate. Luke Johnson in 15 minutes talking Saints. I got some baseball statistics I want to get to as well, and Chris Blair, voice of the Tigers, will be with us at 2:15. So lock us in for the next 2 hours. Appreciate you hanging out with us. We'll start today the way we start every single day. That's, of course, with our Genesis opening drive.
It's time for Hunt's opening drive, presented by Genesis of Baton Rouge.
Huge news in LSU football recruiting yesterday, just a little bit after we got off the air here on the Hunt Palmer Show, and that is, of course, the commitment of Tristan Keys, 5-star wide receiver from Hattiesburg High School in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I was on campus on Tuesday, and I was at practice, and then we went into interviews in the team room, and that's where we talked to Bauer Sharp, and we spoke with Barry and Brown. We talked to Jack Pyburn. And while we were doing that, there was very clearly a prospective student athlete who was kind of soaking in the entire thing, walking through the facility with family and friends, had some escorts here and there, and I had no idea who it was. But it was relayed to me that it was Tristan Keys. And about 28 hours later, Tristan Keys committed to LSU after that midweek visit, and this is big, big, big news. Now, eventually there may come a time where I don't feel the need to throw this massive caveat into a reasonable discussion, but today's not that day. We've got to throw the caveat in there just so you don't say that I'm stupid. I know that commitments don't mean much these days. I know that LSU was left at the altar at the 11th hour twice last year. I know all that stuff. And I'm not here suggesting that Tristan Keys is a stone-cold lead pipe lock to sign with LSU and early enroll and be a starter on the field in the fall of 2026. Like, I know that, okay? But we cover the team. He's a really good high school player. He's clearly interested in LSU. And I do think right now it's probably fair to suggest that LSU is the leader to get Tristan Keys. Is that fair? Maybe that's fair? So with that all said, let's just talk about what it could mean hypothetically if he did sign with LSU when that time comes in December. You look at his profile, he's almost 6'3". He's almost 190 pounds. He is the number one rated receiver by On3, by 24/7. He's the number 2 rated receiver in the nation by ESPN and Rivals. Everyone has got him as the best player in Mississippi. Outside of ESPN, they've got him number 2. But he's a top 10 player in the country, no matter who you talk to. That's a big, big get. That doesn't guarantee you that he's Jeremiah Smith. It doesn't guarantee you that he's Julio Jones. It doesn't guarantee you that he's A.J. Green. But he's a really high-profile player. And I'll say this. I was thinking about this earlier. When I say premium position in football, I think immediately you go to quarterback. And I think these days you go to edge rusher, you go to offensive tackle. The quarterback and the folks that affect the quarterback and protect the quarterback, those are immediately where you go. But when I think about the landscape of college football, it's really important to have good wide receivers. Like, it really is. Even the Georgia team 2 years ago, they're like, I'm not sure about these weapons. Well, Lad McConkey's making a name for himself in the NFL, and Brock Bowers is basically a wide receiver, and he set the record for tight end catches in the NFL history. So wide receivers is a big deal. And we know that LSU, when they've had their best teams, have had elite wide receivers. You don't have to go far in the distant past to see that with Jefferson and Chase, and then a couple years ago with Neighbors and Thomas. And when you're great on offense, wide receivers are a big deal. And Tristan Keys is as good a wide receiver as there is in the high school junior class currently. And he's pledged to LSU. Now, you look at how that could theoretically, hypothetically, however you want to phrase it, I know where we're going. Look at LSU's depth chart right now at wide receiver. You figure at the top of things, Nick Anderson is a fourth-year player. Barian Brown is a fourth-year player. Aaron Anderson is a fourth-year player. All of those guys could move on, and we think are likely to move on. And Chris Hilton's a fifth-year senior. That's kind of the top of you. And Xavier Thomas is a fourth-year senior. So Xavier Thomas and Chris Hilton will not be back. Barian Brown will not be back. And I don't think Nick Anderson and Aaron Anderson are going to be back. Now, we'll see. There's a lot of things to do, and Aaron Anderson's not 6'4", so we get it. But that's a lot of production that very well could be walking out the door. Destin Hill will have options after this year. He hadn't played very much college football, so we'll see. But really, if you're looking at the likely returners on LSU's team when you finally could see some emergence from Tristan Keys in his first year on campus, you're looking at right now Kyle Parker, Jelani Watkins, maybe Aaron Anderson, Teron Francis, Phillip Wright. Like, that's where you are right now. That could use some more depth and some more talent. And Tristan Keys certainly offers that. The transfer portal is going to be available at LSU. We know this past year they went and got Barian Brown and Nick Anderson. Likely the two best wide receiver options in the NFL, in the SEC that went into the transfer portal. So that's always going to be available. But, you're probably going to get those guys for 1 year. You could theoretically have Tristan Keys for 3 years, for 4 years. And I like that possibility. I'm not telling you he's Jeremiah Smith or Julio Jones, like I said, but it's a big deal to get him in the boat for now and see if you can keep him there for the next 7 months. Now, you look at LSU's recruiting class with Tristan Keys involved. And right now, according to On3, you're talking about the best class in the nation. You've got Tristan Keys, a 5-star at wide receiver. You've got Richard Anderson and his high school teammate Aiden Hall, both high 4-star players from Carr. You've got Bryson Martinez from East Ascension right down the road, who's a 4-star offensive tackle. Kenny Darby joins Tristan Keys in this class as a wide receiver. He's from Airline. He's moving up a lot of draft boards. I keep going with the NFL route. A lot of recruiting boards, a lot of scouting boards, a lot of ranking boards at this point. He's a guy that a lot of people think a lot of. Ja'Kai Anderson is a wide receiver in this class from McDonough 35. And then you've got Jalen Chapman, an interior offensive lineman who's a 3-star from Warren Easton down in New Orleans. So you're talking about high-profile guys, highly ranked guys, and then 3 of them at wide receiver. So I funneled through that list of your depth chart and how you're losing a significant amount of guys. And for Cortez Hankton, it's about going out and restocking these shelves. And you certainly had a good start from inside the state with Ja'Kai Anderson and Kenny Darby, and then you add outside the state. Now, Hattiesburg's really close. It's not like they're going to Baltimore or up in Michigan or to the West Coast. Hattiesburg is closer to Baton Rouge than it is to Oxford or Starkville. So this is a guy that they targeted early. They've gotten on campus a couple times. They're in a heavy recruiting battle, and trust me, I know Tennessee's not going away. Alabama's not going away. Those are schools with deep pockets that have coaches that fancy themselves as offensive geniuses that are going to try to pry him away. But the pitch to come to LSU is a pretty good one. We're losing a lot of production that's going to leave us after your senior year of high school, and we've got a pretty good track record of getting guys paid at the next level. You only have to go back, look at that, 30 hours since Jamar Chase made $1 bajillion. He and Justin Jefferson, 2 highest paid wide receivers in NFL history. Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas setting records, making Pro Bowl games. And you've got an offense that you feel like is plug and play. So I think this is a really, really big deal that certainly could change over time if he decides to go elsewhere. But right now, you look at LSU's class, and the Tigers continue to reel in high-level commitments. And when you can add a guy like Tristan Keys to this in-state group that's so highly touted and so well thought of that you've got inroads on and look to be doing very well with, you right now are setting the foundation for another excellent high school recruiting class. And that is still important. The portal's vital, and you've got to go get starters. And LSU did that this past year. But you've got to be able to supplement that with really good high school classes that you may be able to develop through. I'll go to different positions, but you need your Will Campbell and Emory Joneses. You need those guys. You need to have your Greg Penns and Harold Perkins and Whit Weeks. Like, you need to have guys you can develop because you can't count on trying to bring in 30 guys from the portal every year. You can go get 15, but you need to have your steady pool of talent coming in on the high school ranks to make your roster balance. And LSU seems to be striking that balance better than they were 2 years ago. Let's hope that that continues. Tristan Keys, 6'3", 190-pound wide receiver from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, 5-star player, top 10 in the country by every service. Commits to LSU yesterday. Big deal for the Tigers. If you're looking for our LSU coverage, you can find it on LouisianaSports.net and certainly on YouTube at Hunt on LSU. Want to invite you all to download the 104.5 ESPN app as well. I know a lot of you have it, and you know that you can listen on 104.5 ESPN. But also, we're using it with LouisianaSports.net, kind of a dual-purpose thing. You can stream us and find us on demand on the app, but you can also get the notifications when big things like this happen. We're not going to send you a push 4 times a day with every story that comes up on the website. But you get a 5-star commitment, a baseball score on a weekend, maybe baseball game gets postponed or canceled or suspended, that kind of stuff. We can push stuff to you if you download the app and enable your notifications at the 104.5 ESPN app. It is brought to you by Bayou Ford and CDJR. It's 104.5 ESPN app there on your app store. So go ahead and give that a download and enable your notifications. We'll get you that information as we can. That's our Genesis opening drive here on this Thursday. When we come back, Luke Johnson talking Saints. That's next.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Genesis of Baton Rouge. Genesis of Baton Rouge.com. Genesis of Baton Rouge is the only fully exclusive Genesis dealer in the state of Louisiana. So if you're listening from inside Baton Rouge, well, that's great. You can get on by Airline Highway and see it. If you're somewhere else in the state and you're thinking, Genesis sounds like something I'd like to look into, come on down to Baton Rouge and check it out. They've got your sedans, they've got your SUVs, and you'll know when you get behind the wheel, it is a luxury driving experience. No question about that. How does 3 years of complimentary maintenance sound? Pretty good deal. 3 years of complimentary valet maintenance, even better than that. They will come get your vehicle. They will take it to the dealership, leave you with a loaner so you can get on about your day. They'll handle your maintenance, change your oil, deal with the cabin air filter, deal with the wiper fluid, blades, that kind of thing. Bring it right back to you. 3 years complimentary maintenance, and it's convenient. It's part of being a Genesis of Baton Rouge driver. Every single new Genesis purchase comes with a 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty. Genesis of Baton Rouge. Check out that inventory at genesisofbatonrouge.com. Genesisofbatonrouge.com.
This is the Hunt Palmer Show. Hopefully Hunt remembered to bring his laptop charger. Nah, there's no chance.
That rejoin doesn't hit the same without Beck in that seat, who's usually hounding me over the amount of battery life left on my laptop. Currently at this juncture in the show where we have about an hour and 45 minutes left, and I've got an hour 39 left on the laptop battery. So I feel like we got a reasonable chance to get to the finish line.
I'm not a big fan of the diss. That was such a diss. I didn't see that coming.
A lot of inside jokes on the Let's Rejoins. Luke Johnson joins us, covers the Saints for the Advocate with us on Thursdays. Luke, how are you? We got him, Jordan?
Yeah. Hey, you kind of blacked out for a second. I didn't hear you intro me, but hey, what's up, Hunt? Are you getting any sleep, man?
Last night wasn't great. We're to be honest, last night was not great, but we're We're gonna get there. We're gonna win the war eventually. Keller won the battle last night. Let's talk about the Saints' offensive line. I think that was a huge topic when we were back in training camp in California in August. What'd you learn this past season with the Saints' offensive line?
I think I learned that they have potential to be pretty good. A lot better than we thought going into last year. I think Fuaga had a really nice rookie season as a left tackle. There's questions about whether he could hold up on that side. I think Trevor Penning had he's by far not close to being a perfect player, right? But I think he took a lot of strides forward, and he can be somebody you can count on. I think when Eric McCoy was healthy, he's one of the best centers in football, and Cesar Ruiz was fine. I think really they're one player away from having a decent to good offensive line, which I think I would have been surprised to say that last year this time.
So what do they do about that position? I know that they added Will Clapp. He seems like a swing guy and a depth piece. I mean, what do they do about that guard spot?
Yeah, I mean, they still got to fill it, right? And I think there's a couple different ways you can do that. Kellen Moore has talked about the investment in the offensive line here, and that's one of the things that drew him to the job. I don't think it'd be a surprise to me if they went, offensive tackle at number 9. That's somebody like Will Campbell or Membo, the guy from Texas, and you see if they can play tackle, and maybe they're better suited as a guard. I think you could transition Penning to guard fairly easily. He was somebody who I think really excelled as a run blocker, and his probably weakest parts of his game were in space as a pass blocker. I think maybe you could mitigate that a little bit with him at guard. Let's say they draft Will Campbell, and he's somebody who's scouts are kind of split on as he a guard or a tackle. You try him out at tackle and see if he works there, and if he's better as a guard, then you've got first rounders at both guard spots and both tackle spots, and you're okay. Or they have cap space and they could fill it with a veteran guy who would probably come pretty cheap. Brandon Scherf is still out there. A couple other guys who have some legitimate NFL starting experience, who maybe they're not a long-term answer there, but they can give you serviceable to good offensive line play at guard. I think they have options to fill it. I certainly don't think they're even close to done there.
Has Trevor Penning worked at guard at all? I know it's been a discussion between folks that cover the team, but has he ever repped at guard?
Never taken a single snap at guard. Okay. So that would be that's a huge projection, right? Some guys can't do it. He's never played guard even in high school. So that'd be a risk if you decided to say maybe that's where he best fits. But I do think that based off of what we've seen, I think he would be pretty good there. And we've seen guys have success making that transition, right? Mekhi Becton last year, he was a very similar player to Penning, big, huge, athletic, who struggled at tackle, and you put him in a guard, and he played pretty well for the Philadelphia Eagles during the Super Bowl run. So I think when you see stuff like that happen, you can kind of see that path for Penning existing if the Saints wanted to take it. Now, I have no idea if that's something they'd even consider, right? Maybe they are just he is our right tackle, and that's where he's going to be. But I do think that it should be on the table for them.
I don't expect you to be able to recall offensive lines from a decade ago, but as I look at Kellen Moore's career, I know that Dallas invested heavily in their offensive line and had a really good offensive line over the course of time when he was there, and I know what Philly's line was last year. I don't know what LA had in that 1 year he was there, but it feels like Kellen Moore has had some really good offensive lines to call plays for. How do you feel like the Saints potentially stack up in that discussion?
Well, I mean, they're not on par. Philly had 4 Pro Bowlers on its offensive line last year, right? And the other guy was Mekhi Becton, who just signed a $10 million a year contract with the Chargers. He had 2 of the best offensive linemen of their generation with Dallas, with Tyron Smith at left tackle and Zach Martin at guard. in addition to guys like Lyle Collins, who played very well for him while he was there. In LA, he had Rashawn Slater at tackle. I think Corey Linsley was still the center there. Two of like the high profile players of their position in the NFL. I think he has at least that and Eric McCoy. Yeah, I think as long as McCoy can stay healthy, he is like a top 5 center in the NFL. I think it remains to be seen with the rest of them, but like I do think that there is there's some upward mobility for those guys. Especially like pending if he can build on what he did last year. If Fuaga can build on what he did last year, I think you're looking at 2 solid pieces there. A really, really good one in Eric McCoy, a fine player in Cesar Ruiz. I don't think he's ever going to be a dominant guard, but I think he's solid when he's in there. If you can just get one more piece, I think you can have the makings of a pretty good offensive line. And we saw it like when Derek Carr was in the lineup. He played 10 games, he took 8 sacks. And when they had those guys all together, their running game looked pretty good. Now they're not going to be like doing that strict zone heavy running game that they did last year under Quint Kubiak, but like you can see the elements there being successful.
Yeah, whenever you talk about things like that, I bring myself back to those first 2 weeks, and I wrestle with it a little bit. I wrestle with the fact that Carolina and Dallas weren't any good, and I wrestle with the fact that the Saints really did look so good. And I wonder if I think it's easy for us to look back and go, those 2 teams suck, don't look at anything. But there's also a part of me that wants to go, it still was pretty good for 2 weeks before it all fell apart, and maybe there's something there.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't think you can look at those 2 games and really convince yourself. But I do think that you can say like, hey, when it was going right, it was going really, really good. Let's like lean into the strengths that we showed there when we were healthy. I do think that you can take some of that. You just can't, like what I hope they're not doing as an organization, which maybe they are. Yeah. Because they had so many injuries last year. What I hope they're not doing is they're like looking at those 2 games and they're saying like, well, yeah, well, we can be that. Okay. Because it's just like that was unsustainable, right? Yeah. Like you can't do that over the course of the year. But I do think that you can say like, we have some pretty good players. Let's continue building on that and see where this can go. Like, it's not like I don't think it's a total blow up situation there. They've got good players on the line. They've got good players at receiver. They've got a really good running back. Quarterback is what it is. I know everybody, hates Derek Carr around here, but he played pretty well when he was in the lineup last year. You can make that work offensively, but they need to keep building on it.
Anything that you may expect to hear in the next 7-10 days as far as free agent signings go? Maybe a name or a position, or all is kind of quiet right now?
I always kind of thought that they should be kicking the tires on some of these veteran wide receivers. There's some really good players out there. I mean, they're like on the tail end of their career, but like Keenan Allen is unsigned. Amari Cooper is unsigned. Stephon Diggs is unsigned. He's coming off a major injury, but big name. Brandon Cooks is unsigned. I think some of those guys would be better as complements in this offense, but like if you could get any of those guys at a reasonable price to be a number 3 behind Shaheed and Olave and give you, especially in the case of Keenan Allen, like a possession type receiver, I think that'd be really good for this offense. And you could kind of free yourself up a little bit in the draft. Because I don't think this is a great draft class at receiver. There's really one guy who I think is like a surefire first round pick, and Ted McMillan. And then outside of that, it's kind of, it depends on what your flavor is. So just like the fact that they were in on Cooper Kupp, which, like, by the way, I think they were very smart to not buy in at that price point. It tells me that maybe one of those other veteran receivers that is out there could potentially fit what they're looking for.
All your Saints coverage, you can find it over at The Advocate, at by Luke Johnson on Twitter. He's with us every single Thursday. Thanks, Luke.
A pleasure, buddy.
Luke Johnson from The Advocate. Always good to chat with him about the New Orleans Saints. I think it's got to start at the offensive line with the offense. I mean, when they were good and healthy last year, the Saints were humming pretty good. And then they had a couple of cracks, and it just absolutely went to hell for New Orleans. And Kellen Moore, as we mentioned, has worked with some really good offensive lines in his time, and that's something that he's obviously going to take as a priority. I wouldn't throw a fit if they took an offensive lineman with their first pick in the draft. I think there are other places they can look as well, but offensive line would make some sense if you feel like that's the best way to patch that hole at left guard. So we'll see. That's our Saints report for today. Appreciate Luke for stopping on by. Another huge weekend in the Southeastern Conference. What about LSU and Texas? What about Texas A&M and Vanderbilt, which will play tonight? There are a number of big-time matchups on tap. We'll talk to Joe Healy about all of it coming up next.
The Hunt Palmer Show. You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show with former Texas A&M Yell leader, Hunt Palmer. Giga Maggies.
I'm going to bet that the next guest on this program, who is on the line right now, is a little bit confused about that rejoin. Joe Healy from D1 Baseball's SEC Extra Team Highway to Hoover podcast, and with us every Thursday talking SEC baseball, joins us now. Joe, how are you?
Pretty good. And yeah, a little fun fact about me, between having two parents who were or are Aggies, I guess are is the term they prefer to use. You're never a former Aggie. Sure. Hunt, they say you're a former student, is what they say. So between that and my first job out of college actually was on the A&M campus. I actually have more knowledge about the Yell leaders than you would think. I'm not saying I want to have the knowledge, but I do have it.
Our afternoon host had me come in and act like a Yell leader before the LSU Texas A&M football game back in 2022, and I made a complete fool of myself and got a lot of views on social media. And then they made that rejoin to commemorate that buffoonery. So that's the story behind that. Let's talk some baseball, and I guess we can start with Texas A&M here because they got swept on their home field by Alabama. And I think for me, when I look at that series, the one thing that stood out was on Sunday they didn't score a run. That's just hard for me to believe. The story keeps developing. Do you have any further explanation as to why Texas A&M has played the way that they have?
Nope. Next question.
Yep.
No, I said on the Highway to Hoover podcast, like, they stink.
Yeah.
And like, I don't say that to be flippant, but they just do. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. And it's like, the thing with me, I think you're right to seize on the fact that against Alabama's Sunday pitching, which hasn't been particularly good, not terrible, but hasn't been particularly good, they just had nothing. And so that is concerning. I think there's also, even beyond just the fielding errors, and that is a problem also. They're not a good defensive team, and there's good reasons for that. They've had to move a lot of pieces around, but also even some of the pieces that aren't moved around, they're just not great defenders. But the other part is, like, there's just kind of these like weird mental lapses or just things you wouldn't expect. Like, just to give one micro example, Jace Laviolette gets caught stealing second base, and rather than slide head first, which is kind of what you're taught to do there, he slides in feet first, which of course A, slows you down, but also B, the throw comes in, it's high, and he ends up getting tagged out because he slid feet first, which means he's sitting up. So he gets tagged on the shoulder. Whereas if he's hands first, the middle infielder is never able to reach down and tag him. So it's little things like that have just kind of been adding up and adding up and adding up. So at this point, I'm just kind of like, hey, I need to see something else from them before I start to talk about them as any sort of postseason threat again. The only thing, Hunt, that keeps me like even just 2% kind of intrigued here is just we see this every year with some SEC team that just falls on their face right out of the gate and then kind of figures it out as time goes on. We'll see if they have that in them. Certainly the pitching is not a problem, so I guess if nothing else, you feel like they're going to be able to keep some scores low and maybe you pull some things out, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, if A&M fans don't want to hear it, but I mean, if you are removed from the situation like I am over here, and I'm looking at the way that their weekend rotation threw it over the weekend, I'm going, you got a chance. You just got to find a way to get your head above water. LSU proved that with Holman and Jump last year. So we'll see. We'll leave that one in the rearview mirror. Another sweep. There were 4 of them over the weekend. Tennessee swept Florida up in Knoxville. My personal take was that Florida actually acquitted themselves okay. They just didn't win any of the games. And I think Tennessee's really, really good. What were your thoughts on that 3-game sweep up at Lindsey Nelson?
Yeah, I totally agree. Florida looked fine. Like, I don't, but it was just 2 teams that are on different levels. And I think it goes to show something I think I've talked about on your show the last couple of weeks, just that it feels like LSU and Tennessee are kind of on one plane, and then there's a gap, even to Arkansas, which is kind of in that mix too. So I think we saw that. Florida's a very good team, even though they're beaten up a little bit right now. But Tennessee's just better. And I think that the biggest thing for me with Tennessee that stood out is we've talked about Frank Anderson's influence, and they get a complete game shutout in game 2 of that series from Marcus Phillips, who last year was a reliever who faced like 1 or 2 batters per outing. And now he's out there throwing 7 shutout against Florida, which I don't care who Florida's missing in their lineup. Like, that's impressive stuff. And so, if that, now that's probably an extreme example. I'm not saying he's going to be that every week, but it does show you the ceiling of their rotation. If Doyle continues to throw like that and you've got Marcus Phillips behind him, it looks like Tennessee's kind of done it again in terms of developing pitching and just kind of proving that, between the player acquisition and player development, they're operating at the highest level of the sport right now.
Where do you come down on Tennessee and LSU as we're talking about that? I know D1 flipped them in their poll. Where did you see that?
Yeah, I had Tennessee just a little bit ahead, and it had less to do with LSU. Although we can nitpick the weekend that was at Mizzou. I'm sure we'll talk about it. But for me, it's just Tennessee has been so overwhelming. And if you sweep Florida the way they did, where there were some compelling moments in that series, the series was closer than the final scores would tell you, I think. But it was a comprehensive sweep. I don't think there's any ambiguity about that. And so it was just too impressive to deny. And it was the first time we've done that in D1 baseball history. Aaron Fitt, who's obviously been there since day one, says, at least to his memory, this was the first time we've had a number 1 team get dropped after sweeping a conference opponent. But it just kind of called for it because that's how dominating Tennessee's been so far.
I don't disagree. I think Tennessee's been awesome. I think LSU's very good, but they've got to get a little bit better, I think. Look, I want to talk about Texas and Mississippi State. We'll leave Texas for a little bit later because LSU's going to Austin tomorrow. Mississippi State, 14-7, kind of losing to everybody with a pulse at this point. Is there cause for real concern in Starkville?
I think so. It's important that we kind of give that some context. I think this team is closer to last year's team than it was to the disasters of the previous season, 2 previous seasons before that. But I do think it's probably a team that's more like last year, certainly, than the teams that hosted before that. So I do think there is cause for concern in terms of if you thought this was an Omaha level team, and I think some state folks thought it could be. But the questions for me are, what do you got behind Pico Khan in the rotation? He's been great, but they've cycled through a few guys after that, and part of that's been injuries, so I get that. And I'm starting to kind of look sideways a little bit from a lineup perspective at, is this just who Hunter Hines is? I think he gets lumped in sometimes with Jared Jones in terms of, hey, slugging first baseman who put up big numbers and guys who probably could be in pro ball right now. But whereas Jared Jones has become a complete hitter and still hits with that power, we're sitting here with Hunter Hines for kind of the second year in a row where he hasn't hit for a ton of power to start the year. His batting average is about 250. He's still striking out too much. It just kind of feels like he's the same guy, and I think we were all looking for him to be a centerpiece. They've had some guys pop up in the lineup that are off to really good starts, but I'm not sure how long that'll last for some of these guys, so they need Hunter Hines to be that centerpiece, and he just hasn't been.
Yeah, LSU's next 2 weekends are Texas and then Mississippi State here at the box. So let's talk about LSU and Texas before we get into the rest of the games this weekend. Horns go to Starkville and sweep, as we said. You and I talked about them before the season started. Said, yeah, not as talented as Schloss. Maybe we want them on the mound, but they can really hit. They pitched it pretty good against Mississippi State. What do you think about the Longhorns at this point?
Yeah, feeling a little better about them on the mound than I did when you and I last talked about it. So I think those are positive steps. And to me, the big thing here is that this feels like vintage Schlossnagle in that, like, they've got holes in this roster, but I just kind of think they're going to keep patching it together. I think there's a ceiling on this team. If they get to Omaha, I wouldn't be shocked, but I don't think this team is a serious national title contender. Those are probably going to be famous last words. But that's my read on this. They've gotten some good stuff from Jared Spencer and Luke Harrison in the rotation, but I think the bigger question is going to be, can they hold their best bullpen guys, Max Grubbs, who's kind of a stock right-hander, soft-tossing guy, who was a starter last year and didn't strike many people out? Have they figured something out with him, or is maybe a little reversion to the mean coming? I think it's closer to the latter. I think their offense is actually probably underperforming their talent level, so I think that's a group that maybe actually could get a little bit better as the season goes on. But they do remind me a little bit of LSU offensively in terms of the depth is really impressive there, and they've got a freshman whose numbers aren't as good as Curiel's, but Adrian Rodriguez is a freshman in their lineup who has just like future superstar written all over him, and it's made their lineup deeper than I think we even anticipated it being coming into the year.
Dish Falk, how does it play? I'm not familiar enough with it. This is Texas' first spin through the SEC. I'm told it's a pretty pitcher-friendly park, but as a native Texan, what is your memory of Dish Falk?
Yeah, it's pitcher-friendly as far as, any ballpark these days is pitcher friendly.
Sure.
Yeah, but it is one of the more pitcher friendly ones. So I think it's one of the reasons why their pitching has kind of worked, is that there's not a lot of pressure on, hey, we have to, it's not like being a Tennessee pitcher where it's like, hey, we can't allow a ball in the air because it might get out of here. So they kind of have some cushion to just, make some pitches, give up some contact and let your defense play. And then the ball's going to stay in the yard. My funniest thing that used to happen at Dish Falk that doesn't anymore is they used to have like that old school, like Astrodome, AstroTurf. And one of their home field advantages used to be if you're an outfielder crashing on like a bloop and you don't get there, the ball would bounce over your head. That thankfully does not happen anymore because it was kind of a circus, but it is still a pretty hard turf surface, but it plays a little more true these days. But yeah, pitcher's park over hitter's park for sure.
Your concern on LSU's number 2 and number 3 with Einstein and Shores right now? High, low, none, what?
Medium, just because I think Mizzou's lineup is better, but I still think it's probably 16-16 on paper in the SEC, and they had some success there. So I'm going to avoid total panic here. But let's just say that I am going to be closely watching this weekend to kind of see how that goes. I'm going to allow them to have, a little bit of an adjustment period, and every pitcher, unless your name is Paul Skeens, has bad weekends. And we're just going to hope that's kind of what we saw there, is that just it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment for these guys as they continue to face SEC batters. And even with Mizzou, compared to a lot of what they faced in non-conference, those were obviously higher level hitters. So maybe it's just that, but I'm definitely going to be watching it closely.
2 games tonight, A&M and Vanderbilt, and then Tennessee at Alabama. Those 2 series, how do you kind of handicap them?
Yeah, the Alabama one's going to be interesting on a couple of levels. I want to see what that atmosphere looks like with Alabama basketball being what it is these days. Right. I kind of worry they're not going to be able to have the atmosphere that it deserves. But I do think that's an offense that can hang around a little bit. Ultimately, I think Tennessee's just too good. But I think Alabama could get a game here because I do think their offense can keep them in games. And look, Riley Quick is now stretched out to 5-6 innings, and he's not as good as Liam Doyle, but he's in that conversation of guys in terms of stuff and quality. So, could they squeak one out there? I think A&M and Vanderbilt is so fascinating, man, because I'm increasingly thinking that this is just the same Vanderbilt. And that's obviously there's a floor there that makes them a postseason team, maybe even a host team if they get really fortunate. But I just don't see enough fundamental differences in their ability to score that I think it changes their overall outlook. They could win this series because A&M is lost and it's at home and all that stuff. But I don't know that I'm necessarily super bought in on Vanderbilt no matter what happens this weekend.
Enjoy the baseball this weekend. We will certainly catch up next week. Thanks, Joe.
All right, see you, buddy.
Joe Healy, D1 Baseball over there, SEC Extra Team, Highway to Hoover, something I listen to every single week. He and Mark Etheridge dive in, especially after the weekend is concluded. They do over an hour of SEC baseball talk, and I always very much enjoy their analysis. So a lot of interesting matchups tonight. 2 games for the Thursday slate. A&M is at Vanderbilt, as I mentioned. Tennessee at Alabama. If Alabama can get 1 game this weekend at home against Vanderbilt, win 1 game, they will have opened at A&M, home Tennessee, and be 4-2. You would have taken that every second of the day back in January. So an interesting deal there, and LSU fans will certainly be locked in on Tennessee. As Joe said, kind of LSU and Tennessee jockeying for position there towards the top of the SEC. So LSU and Texas tomorrow. We'll talk to Mark Etheridge tomorrow, I'm hoping, because he's going to be in Austin. I've already got an interview set up with Texas beat writer for tomorrow. Looking forward to that as well. We'll talk a lot of LSU and Texas on tomorrow's show. Plenty to do in hour number 2 of the show today as we cruise here on this Thursday. I got a bunch of statistics for LSU baseball that I want to kind of go into. It's going to be kind of numbers heavy, but just there's a lot of interesting things that are probably things that you know in the back of your head but haven't put numbers to. We'll do some of that in the second hour. Chris Blair will be with us at 2:15 as well. So plenty to do in the second hour. When we come back, I wasn't planning on doing this segment today, but I'm going to do it. We'll talk about that next.
The Hunt Palmer Show. Welcome back to the Hunt Palmer Show. Here's your host, Hunt, the uniform czar, Palmer. Which uniform do you hate now?
Truly an incredible run by me. Amazing run. 1-0 in the 2025 NCAA tournament. Had Creighton over Louisville, that's a victory. Just an unbelievable performance by me. And now the bracket's busted. I had High Point over Purdue. Purdue will win that game. They have a double-digit lead with 1 minute to go. So it was a one-game run. Are you proud of me, Jordan?
I mean, you gave your best effort.
I
That's
did.
all that matters.
Put my best foot forward.
That's all that matters.
We had a goal to go as far as we could with a perfect bracket.
Yes.
We made it 2 hours. So
Well,
look.
I'll do you one better. I didn't make it any hours because I had Louisville. So I already started off on the wrong foot.
0-1.
Yeah,
All right.
I started off bad.
We'll see what happens when Will Wade's McNeese Cowboys play Clemson later on today. I wrote a column at LouisianaSports.net this morning, and it's titled Tiger Basketball is about the future, not the past. And I put it up, and it has gotten 100% negative feedback. And I'm not shocked by that, but it does, I think, to me, further a discussion because I'm here talking to the LSU fan base. And I write columns all the time. Very rarely do they get the amount of replies and responses that this one did. So clearly, people were interested in the discussion. So I was going to leave the Will Wade thing in yesterday. I'll bring it back for 4 minutes here because when I read the responses to my column, this is what, and I'm generalizing and painting with a broad brush here, but this is generally speaking the tone that I'm sensing in the replies to my column about, hey, let's move forward with basketball, not think about the past. The response is, and I'm generalizing and painting with a broad brush. We had a good basketball coach. The administration screwed it up. It's their fault, not the coach's fault. We're never going to recover from this. Like, that's what it sounds like. It sounds like LSU fans don't think there's any way forward with the basketball program without Will Wade. And I said on the air yesterday and wrote in the column, like, I really enjoyed Will Wade's days as the head basketball coach at LSU. It was really fun to be right there in the mix in January and February and March every year. That was great. But I also have moved on from that and have not clung to the hope, one, that he would come back, or two, clung to the misery of the firing. It was 3 years ago. 3 years. There are plenty of ways to revitalize your basketball program. Maybe one is pumping more money into it. Maybe not, but maybe one is. And LSU's going to try that. But hey, Tennessee canned Bruce Pearl, okay? They hired Rick Barnes, and they're great again. Billy Donovan left Florida. 2 hires later, they're a 1 seed. You don't have to just have one guy pilot the ship to have a good basketball program. There are other coaches that can get things done in Baton Rouge. And my hope is that Matt McMahon is one of those coaches. If he's not, and I know there are tons of y'all listening just rolling your eyes out of the back of your head because LSU just went 3-15 in the league. I get it. I watched it all. What I'm telling you is I hope Matt McMahon is it. If that turns out not to be the case, and Scott Woodward decides to make a move, there are other guys that can coach the basketball program, and you can resurface and be good again. I promise it can happen. I liked Will Wade here as much as anybody. I wish he didn't get fired. I wish he wasn't on the phone when the FBI tapped a wire, okay? But that's over. And I don't think it does any good to just wring our hands over the whole thing 3 years later. If it was in February, we could talk about it. It was 3 years ago. LSU basketball can be good again. And if you want to completely criticize Scott Woodward, which a lot of people are doing, a lot of people, like baseball seems to be going pretty well. Women's basketball seems to be going pretty well. Gymnastics seems to be going pretty well. It stands to reason that I think there's some confidence football could be good. Like, it's not perfect, but you look across the athletic program, LSU's winning a lot. They're winning a lot. So I'm not here to just completely annihilate the entire administration. I wish it had gone differently, but I don't want to relitigate the entire thing over and over and over and over again until LSU makes the tournament. But again, I wouldn't be talking about this if I didn't think people were interested in it. And the metrics on the website indicate there's a lot of people interested in it. So we revisit it. Hopefully LSU basketball is in the tournament this time next year. If they're not, well, you got to go find somebody. All right, that's it for hour number 1 here on this Thursday edition of the Hunt Palmer Show. We'll come back with hour number 2. A lot of baseball stats I want to get into, both individual and team-wise. We'll do that after SportsCenter right here on this Thursday edition of the Hunt Palmer Show.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Genesis of Baton Rouge. GenesisofBatonRouge.com is that website. Look, your buying experience is going to be luxury in every way at Genesis of Baton Rouge. I know there are a lot of you out there that do not like going to the car dealership. You feel like you're going to be assaulted by some over-aggressive salesperson who's just going to try to upsell you, and you're not going to get I understand. There's a stereotype there that exists for a reason. But just try Genesis of Baton Rouge. Their brand ambassadors are going to treat you like a guest, not a customer. They're going to listen to your every need, and they're going to do everything they can to make sure that your experience is top-notch. And when you make that purchase, you're going to get a 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty, and you're going to get 3 years of complimentary maintenance, and you're going to get valet maintenance, and you get a luxury brand of vehicle at a reasonable price. Start that process today at genesisofbatonrouge.com or go see them at Airline and Pico. Airline and Pico, fairly new to the location. Go check them out. Start that process again online at genesisofbatonrouge.com, genesisofbatonrouge.com.